Ji-hoon Kim stood in the observation deck of the human vessel Perseverance, watching the stars drift past in silence. The communication terminal behind him beeped, breaking his thoughts. He turned and walked to the console, pressing the button to receive the incoming message. The holographic display flickered to life, showing the official seal of the Galactic Council. The message was simple. The Council was hosting a cultural exchange event called the Harmony of Companionship on the neutral station Zenith Prime. Every species in the galaxy was invited to bring their domesticated companions, their pets, to share with others. The goal was to foster understanding and unity among the different races. Each delegation would set up an exhibit showing how their species bonded with animals. Ji-hoon read through the message twice, then called for Nari Lee, the ship's xenobiologist. She arrived within minutes, her dark hair tied back in a practical ponytail. Nari leaned over his shoulder and read the message on the screen. "A pet show," she said, raising an eyebrow. "In space. Not just a show," Ji-hoon replied. "A diplomatic event. The Council wants to see how each species treats their animals. It tells them something about our values." Nari pulled up a chair and accessed the network. Her fingers moved quickly across the holographic keyboard as she searched for information about what other species were bringing. Within moments, data began filling the screen. The Velkari were bringing cloud wisps, small floating creatures that hummed soft melodies. The Drantine planned to present purring gel spheres that glowed in different colors based on their mood. The Mothic delegation would showcase their singing moths, tiny insects that created beautiful harmonies. "They're all bringing gentle creatures," Nari observed. "Small, docile, harmless. Things that wouldn't hurt anyone." Ji-hoon nodded slowly. He had noticed the same pattern. Every species seemed to choose animals that were soft, quiet, and completely dependent on their owners. They were showing the galaxy that they were peaceful, nurturing civilizations. It made sense from a diplomatic perspective. "What should we bring?" Nari asked. That was the question Ji-hoon had been asking himself since he first read the message. Earth had plenty of gentle animals. Dogs would be the obvious choice. Humans had lived with dogs for thousands of years. Cats were another option, though they were less predictable. Birds, rabbits, hamsters, all of these would fit perfectly with what the other species were presenting. But something about that choice bothered Ji-hoon. It felt incomplete. Dogs were wonderful companions, but they weren't the whole story of humanity's relationship with animals. Humans had done something that most other species found incomprehensible. They had formed bonds with predators, with creatures that could kill them. Before Ji-hoon could voice his thoughts, another message arrived. This one was from Earth, from Dr. Hae-yoon Park of the Global Wildlife Preservation Division. Ji-hoon opened the file and began reading. Nari watched his expression change as he processed the contents. "What is it?" she asked. "Dr. Park has a suggestion," Ji-hoon said slowly. "She wants us to bring representatives from the Apex Predator Rehabilitation Program." Nari's eyes widened. "You mean tigers," Ji-hoon confirmed. 2 juvenile tigers from their breeding sanctuary. The idea was radical. Dr. Park's message explained her reasoning in careful detail. She argued that Earth's relationship with predators was what made humanity unique. While other species eliminated threats or bred them into harmlessness, humans chose a different path. They respected the power of these animals. They preserved them, studied them, and even formed bonds with them. This, Dr. Park believed, demonstrated something essential about human nature. Nari stood up and paced across the observation deck. "Ji-hoon, the other species are bringing creatures that couldn't hurt a fly. We'd be bringing apex predators, animals with claws and teeth." "I know," Ji-hoon said. "The Council might see it as aggressive, threatening." "They might," he agreed. Nari stopped pacing and looked at him directly. "But you're considering it." Ji-hoon was quiet for a moment. He thought about the message from the Council, about harmony and understanding. He thought about the long list of gentle creatures the other species were bringing. Then he thought about Earth, about the complexity of human civilization, about the national parks where humans protected the very predators that once hunted them. "Every species is going to show the Council how peaceful they are," Ji-hoon said. "They'll all bring animals that need protection, that depend on them completely. But that's not the whole truth of companionship, is it? Real bonds aren't built on dependency. They're built on choice, on mutual respect." "So you want to show them that humans can bond with something dangerous," Nari said. "Not just dangerous, Ji-hoon corrected. Powerful. There's a difference. A tiger isn't evil or malicious. It's a magnificent creature that deserves respect. And somehow, over centuries, humans figured out how to coexist with them, not by making them weak, but by understanding them. Nari considered this. She accessed her database again and pulled up information about the rehabilitation program. The sanctuary raised orphaned tiger cubs and prepared them for eventual release back into protected habitats. The cubs were handled by trained specialists who formed deep bonds with them during their care. The program had been remarkably successful. Who would handle them? Nari asked. Dr. Park recommends Min-ho Choi, Ji-hoon said, pulling up a personnel file. He's 26 years old and has been working with the program for 5 years. He's raised several cubs from infancy. Currently, he's caring for 2 6-month-old tigers named Baekdu and Hala. The file included videos. Ji-hoon played one, and they watched as a young man entered an enclosure where 2 tiger cubs waited. Despite their size, already larger than most dogs, they bounded toward him like playful kittens. Min-ho laughed as they nearly knocked him over, their massive paws pressing against his chest. He wrestled with them gently and they rumbled with contentment. They're still young, Nari noted, but they're already showing their power. Exactly, Ji-hoon said. They're at the perfect age, old enough to demonstrate what they'll become, but young enough to show their capacity for trust and affection. Nari sat back down, her expression serious. This could backfire badly, Ji-hoon. If something goes wrong, if the cubs get scared or aggressive, it could create a diplomatic incident. Other species might see us as reckless or dangerous. Or, Ji-hoon said, they might see us as brave. As a species that doesn't fear strength, that understands the difference between power and violence. They sat in silence for several minutes. Outside the viewport, stars continued their eternal dance. Finally, Nari spoke. You've already made up your mind, haven't you? Ji-hoon smiled slightly. I have. But I needed to hear the arguments against it. Needed to make sure I wasn't being foolish. And I think this is exactly what we need to bring. Not despite the risk, but because of it. Because the truth is always worth more than comfortable lies. Nari nodded slowly, then extended her hand. All right, let's show the galaxy what humanity is really about. Ji-hoon shook her hand, sealing the decision. He drafted a response to Dr. Park approving the proposal. Within hours, arrangements were being made. Min-ho Choi would join their delegation, along with Baekdu and Hala. Special enclosures were being designed, safety protocols established, medical supplies prepared. As the preparations moved forward, Ji-hoon received responses from other delegations who had heard about humanity's choice. Some were curious. Many were confused. A few expressed concern, but the decision was made. The human delegation would arrive at Zenith Prime with 2 tiger cubs, and the galaxy would learn something new about the strange species from Earth. The docking bay of Zenith Prime was unlike anything Ji-hoon had seen before. The massive space station orbited no planet, sitting instead in neutral space where no single species could claim dominance. Ships from hundreds of worlds lined the docking arrays, each one unique in design and purpose. The human vessel. Perseverance settled into its assigned position with a gentle thud. Ji-hoon stood at the cargo bay entrance, watching as Min-ho supervised the unloading of the special transport container. The young wildlife handler moved with calm confidence, speaking softly to the cubs inside. Through the container's transparent panels, Ji-hoon could see Baekdu and Hala, the 2 tiger cubs, pressing their faces against the material and watching everything with curious golden eyes. They're restless, Min-ho said, checking the container's environmental controls. The journey was long for them. How long until we can move them to the exhibit hall? Nari asked, reviewing her datapad. Give me 2 hours to set up the enclosure properly, Min-ho replied. I want to make sure everything is perfect before they come out. Tigers are sensitive to new environments. Ji-hoon nodded and left Min-ho to his work. He and Nari made their way through the station's corridors toward the main exhibition hall. The station itself was a marvel of engineering, with sections designed to accommodate different atmospheric requirements and gravity levels. The exhibition hall had been built in a common zone where most species could coexist comfortably. When they entered the hall, Ji-hoon stopped to take in the scene. The space was enormous, easily the size of several football fields. Hundreds of exhibit booths lined the floor, each one decorated according to the aesthetic preferences of different species. Holographic signs floated above each booth, displaying species names in multiple languages. The variety of pets on display was staggering. At the nearest booth, tiny crystalline creatures floated in midair, chiming like bells whenever anyone approached. Further down, a delegation showcased what looked like living plants that responded to touch by blooming in different colors. Another species had brought aquatic companions that swam through spheres of suspended water, creating rippling patterns. But as Ji-hoon walked through the exhibits, he noticed something. Every single creature was small, gentle, and completely harmless. Some were herbivores, others consumed simple proteins or energy, but none of them had teeth meant for tearing flesh. None had claws designed for killing. They were all soft, docile beings that posed no threat to anyone. "It's like a petting zoo," Nari whispered. "Everything here is designed to be cute and harmless." Ji-hoon said nothing, but he felt the weight of their decision even more heavily now. In a few hours, they would bring Baekdu and Hala into this environment. Two predators among hundreds of prey animals and their handlers. They found their assigned space near the center of the hall. It was larger than most other booths, which made sense given what they were bringing. The area had been prepared according to Minho's specifications, with reinforced transparent barriers that could contain the cubs while still allowing clear viewing. The barriers were made from military-grade material, strong enough to stop a full-grown tiger, let alone 6-month-old cubs. Minho arrived an hour later with a team of human assistants and the transport container. They worked quickly and efficiently, setting up the interior of the enclosure with familiar objects from the sanctuary, logs for climbing, platforms at different heights, water features, and comfortable resting areas. Once everything was ready, Minho opened the container. Baekdu emerged first, his orange and black striped coat gleaming under the hall's lighting. Even at 6 months old, he was impressive, roughly the size of a large dog but with a muscular build that hinted at his future power. He sniffed the air cautiously, then stepped into the enclosure. Hala followed close behind, slightly smaller than her brother but equally alert. The cubs explored their new space with typical feline curiosity. They pawed at the water, tested the climbing structures, and rubbed their faces against the familiar objects Minho had brought. After a few minutes, they settled down near the center of the enclosure, watching the activity in the hall beyond their transparent walls. Word spread quickly through the exhibition. Ji-hoon watched as small groups of aliens began approaching the human booth, their expressions ranging from curiosity to concern. The first delegation to arrive was from Velkar, led by Ambassador Surin, a tall crystalline being whose body reflected light in rainbow patterns. Surin approached the barrier cautiously, her crystalline structure dimming as she registered what she was seeing. She stopped several feet away, her body language radiating discomfort. "Those are predators," she said, her voice like wind chimes. "You brought predators to a harmony exhibition." "We brought companions," Ji-hoon replied calmly. "Tigers are apex predators, yes, but they're also capable of forming deep bonds with humans." "They have teeth," Surin said, as if this explained everything. "Claws. They're designed to kill." Nari stepped forward, her datapad ready. "Ambassador, every species here brought animals that reflect their relationship with nature. We've done the same. Humans have coexisted with predators for thousands of years." More delegates were gathering now, drawn by the growing crowd. A reptilian Drantine named Tail pushed through the group, his scaled face showing fascination rather than fear. He approached the barrier more closely, studying the cubs with bright, intelligent eyes. "How is this possible?" Tail asked. "My species eliminated our apex predators millions of years ago. They were too dangerous to coexist with. Humans chose a different path," Ji-hoon explained. "We learned to understand them, to respect their nature without trying to change it fundamentally." As if on cue, Minho entered the enclosure through the secured entrance. Several aliens gasped, and Surin actually stepped backward. Inside the enclosure, both cubs immediately focused on Minho. They rose from their resting positions and bounded toward him. The aliens watching held their collective breath. To them, it must have looked like an attack. Two powerful predators charging at a vulnerable human, but Ji-hoon had seen this behavior before in the videos. He knew what was coming. Baekdu reached Minho first and reared up, placing his enormous paws on the man's chest. Minho laughed and wrapped his arms around the cub, scratching behind his ears. Hala arrived a second later, rubbing her entire body against Minho's legs and producing a rumbling sound that echoed through the enclosure. "That's purring," Nari explained to the stunned crowd. It's a sign of contentment and affection. Minho sat down on one of the platforms and both cubs immediately climbed onto him, competing for attention. He played with them gently, running his hands through their fur, tugging playfully at their ears. They responded with the enthusiasm of kittens despite their size and the visible power in their movements. They could kill him, Surin whispered. I could simply decide to use those teeth and claws, but they don't, Ji-hoon said. That's the point. They have the power to harm, but they choose not to. That's what makes the bond meaningful. It's built on mutual choice, not on one side being too weak to be dangerous. Tail moved even closer to the barrier, pressing his face against it. What are their names? Baekdu and Hala, Minho called out from inside, named after mountains on Earth. Can they understand commands? Another alien asked from the crowd. Minho stood up and the cubs immediately focused on him. He raised his hand, palm out, and said something in a calm voice. Both tigers sat instantly, their eyes fixed on their handler. He made another gesture and they lay down. A third command, bro. They're intelligent, Minho explained. Not just instinctive. They learn, they remember, they make choices. That's why this relationship works. It's not one-sided control, it's partnership. The demonstration continued for another hour. More delegations arrived, drawn by the growing crowd. Some were horrified, others fascinated. Arguments broke out among different groups about whether the human exhibit was appropriate. But everyone was watching. In a hall full of gentle creatures, the tigers commanded attention. As the day wore on, Ji-hoon noticed something interesting. Many of the younger aliens, despite their initial fear, kept returning to watch the cubs. They were mesmerized by the combination of power and grace, by the clear affection between Minho and his charges. One young delegate, a small mammalian creature named Youngji from a prey species, stood at the barrier for nearly an hour, just watching. When Hala approached the transparent wall and sat down, staring back at her with curious eyes, Youngji didn't run. Instead, she slowly raised her hand and placed it against the barrier. Hala lifted her paw and pressed it against the same spot from the other side. It was a small moment, but Ji-hoon saw its significance. Fear meeting trust. Predator and prey, acknowledging each other not as enemies but as living beings capable of connection. By the time the exhibition hall closed for the day, the human booth had become the most talked about display at the entire event. News of the tigers spread through the station's communication networks. Some called it brilliant, others called it reckless, but no one could ignore it. That night, as Ji-hoon reviewed the day's events, he received a message. The Galactic Council wanted to meet with him first thing in the morning. The subject line simply read, Emergency Session Regarding Human Exhibition. Ji-hoon looked out at the stars visible through his quarter's view. The council chamber was built to accommodate hundreds of different species simultaneously. Sections of the room had varying gravity, atmosphere composition, and temperature controls. Ji-hoon sat in the human delegation area, with Nari on his left and legal advisor So-min Kang on his right. Around them, representatives from across the galaxy filled their designated spaces, many of them staring at the humans with expressions that ranged from curiosity to open hostility. At the center of the chamber, the council speakers occupied their elevated platform. There were 12 of them, representing the oldest and most influential civilizations in the galaxy. Their leader, Speaker Velian, was a massive creature that resembled flowing liquid metal, constantly shifting and reforming. This emergency session has been called to address concerns about the human exhibition, Velian announced, their voice resonating through translation devices in every language simultaneously. Multiple delegations have filed formal complaints. Before we hear these complaints, the human delegation will explain their choice. Ji-hoon rose from his seat and walked to the central speaking platform. He had prepared remarks, but looking at the assembled delegations, he decided to speak from his heart instead. Members of the council, fellow delegates, he began. When we received the invitation to this cultural exchange, we understood the goal was to foster understanding between our species. To that end, we chose to bring representatives that would give you honest insight into humanity's relationship with nature. You brought predators, a voice called out from the Velkari section. It was Ambassador Surin, her crystalline body pulsing with agitation. Creatures designed to kill. This is a harmony exhibition, not a demonstration of violence. With respect, Ambassador, Ji-hoon replied. Bektu and Hala have never demonstrated violence. They've shown only affection and trust toward their handler and curiosity toward observers. Another delegate stood, this one from a species Ji-hoon didn't recognize. The potential for violence is enough. My people brought companions that couldn't harm anyone even if they wanted to. Your tigers could kill dozens before anyone could stop them. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. Ji-hoon waited for them to quiet before responding. You're right, he said simply. They could. That's precisely why our bond with them is meaningful. The chamber erupted in confused discussion. Speaker Velian raised a limb for silence. Explain, Velian commanded. Ji-hoon took a breath. Every species here brought animals that are dependent on them. Creatures that need protection, that can't survive without constant care. These relationships are valuable and they show compassion. But they don't show trust, not real trust. He gestured toward the viewing screens, which displayed images from the exhibition hall. True trust only exists between equals, between beings who could harm each other but choose not to. A prey animal that cuddles with its owner isn't making a choice. It has no other option. But a predator that shows affection, that chooses restraint, that follows commands even when it could easily overpower its handler, that's choosing the relationship. That's madness, Surin said. Why would any species intentionally maintain relationships with creatures that could destroy them? Nari stood and joined Ji-hoon at the platform. May I address that question? Speaker Velian nodded permission. Nari activated her datapad, projecting historical information onto the chamber's main display. Images of Earth appeared, showing forests, mountains, oceans, and the diverse wildlife that inhabited them. This is Earth, Nari explained, our homeworld. For most of our evolutionary history, humans were not the apex predators. We were prey. We were hunted by creatures much stronger and faster than us, but instead of hiding forever or eliminating every threat, we learned to coexist. We studied the predators. We understood them. And eventually we formed partnerships with some of them. The display shifted to show ancient images of humans with wolves, gradually transforming over thousands of years into humans with domestic dogs. The wolf was one of our greatest threats, Nari continued. But we didn't exterminate them. We learned that some wolves were willing to cooperate with humans. Over generations, this cooperation evolved into the relationship we have with dogs today. But we never forgot what they came from. We never stopped respecting the predator nature that still exists in them. The display changed again, showing modern images of humans working with various predators, falconers with birds of prey, divers swimming alongside sharks, conservation workers caring for big cats. This pattern repeated throughout our history, Nari said. We formed relationships not despite the danger, but because of what we could learn from it. These partnerships taught us about strength, about respect, about the difference between power and violence. They made us better. A new voice spoke up. It came from the section representing a species called the Drantine. Delegate Tail, the reptilian who had been fascinated by the tigers at the exhibition, stood. Dr. Lee, my species chose a different path millions of years ago. We eliminated our apex predators because they threatened our civilization. We've lived in peace ever since. Are you suggesting that was wrong? Nari shook her head. Not wrong. Just different. Every species makes choices based on their values and circumstances. But the question posed to us was about our relationships with animals, about what defines us. For humans, this is part of who we are. Counselor Jiwon, representing a peaceful herbivorous species that had allied with humanity decades earlier, stood hesitantly. I have great respect for human civilization. They've been valuable partners, but I must voice concern. The presence of these predators creates risk for everyone on the station. What if something goes wrong? What if they become aggressive? Extensive safety protocols are in place, Somin, the legal advisor, interjected. The enclosure is built to military specifications. Multiple emergency response teams are on standby. The cubs are constantly monitored. But the risk remains, Jiwon insisted. For what purpose do we accept this risk? To prove a philosophical point? Before Ji-hoon could respond, the chamber doors opened. A junior delegate entered, someone Ji-hoon recognized from the day before. It was Youngji, the small mammalian being who had spent so long watching Hala. She approached the speaking platform with obvious nervousness, her limbs trembling slightly. May I address the council? She asked quietly. Speaker Velian seemed surprised but gestured permission. Delegate Youngji of Harmonia, you may speak. Youngji climbed onto an elevated platform so others could see her better. Her voice was soft but steady. Yesterday I went to the human exhibition. I went because I was curious, even though my species has a deep instinctive fear of predators. Our evolution was shaped by creatures much like those tigers. Everything in my biology screamed at me to run. The chamber was completely silent now, everyone listening. But I didn't run, Youngji continued. I stood at that barrier and watched. I saw the cubs play with their handler. I saw intelligence in their eyes, not just instinct. And then one of them, Hala, she approached the barrier and looked at me. Really looked at me. Not as food, not as prey, just as another living being. Her voice grew stronger. I placed my hand against the barrier and she pressed her paw to the same spot. In that moment I understood something I never had before. The humans aren't saying predators aren't dangerous. They're saying that danger and evil aren't the same thing. That strength doesn't have to mean violence. That power can choose gentleness. She turned to face the council directly. We came to this exhibition to show harmony through safety, through eliminating all risk. But maybe that's not real harmony. Maybe real harmony is what the humans are showing us. Different beings, even natural enemies, choosing to coexist through understanding and respect. That's harder. It's riskier. But maybe it's more honest. Youngji stepped down from the platform, her entire body shaking from the effort of speaking publicly. But she had said what needed to be said. The chamber erupted in discussion again. But the tone had shifted. Ji-hoon watched as delegates who had been firmly opposed to the human exhibit began talking among themselves with less certainty. Tail was showing something on his datapad to nearby delegations. Even Surin had dimmed her aggressive light pulsing. Speaker Valian called for order. The council will take a short recess to deliberate. All delegations are to remain in their sections. For 30 minutes the chamber buzzed with quiet conversations. Ji-hoon sat with his team, uncertain which way the decision would go. Soman reviewed legal precedents. Nari monitored the room's sentiment through her datapad. All they could do was wait. When the council reconvened, Speaker Velian's form had settled into a more solid configuration, which Ji-hoon had learned meant they had reached a decision. The council has deliberated, Velian announced. By a vote of 8-4, we have decided to allow the human exhibition to continue. However, additional safety measures must be implemented immediately, and any sign of aggressive behavior will result in immediate removal of the predators from the station. Relief washed through Ji-hoon, but before he could celebrate, Valiant continued. Furthermore, the council has decided that this incident requires deeper examination. Over the next 3 days, we will schedule additional presentations where the human delegation can provide more context about their relationship with apex predators. Other delegations are encouraged to attend and engage in dialogue. It wasn't a complete victory, but it was better than Ji-hoon had hoped for. As the session adjourned, several delegates approached the human section. Some wanted to argue further, but others, like Tail and Youngji, wanted to learn more. That evening, Ji-hoon returned to the exhibition hall where Minho was playing with the cubs. Baekdu and Hala seemed completely oblivious to the controversy they had created. They were just being themselves. Playful, curious, powerful young predators who trusted their handler completely. How did it go? Minho asked, tossing a toy for the cubs to chase. We get to stay, Ji-hoon said. But we have to convince them this was the right choice. Minho smiled as Hala brought the toy back to him, her tail swishing contentedly. Then I guess we'd better show them what these two can really do. Ji-hoon nodded, watching the cubs play. The hard part was just beginning. The alarm started as a low hum, then escalated into a piercing wail that echoed through every corridor of Zenith Prime. Ji-hoon was in his quarters reviewing notes for the next day's presentation when the sound jolted him to his feet. Red emergency lights began flashing along the walls. His communication device buzzed with an automated message. Critical system failure in exotic habitat wing. All personnel evacuate to designated safe zones. Ji-hoon grabbed his jacket and ran toward the exhibition hall. The corridors were filled with aliens moving in organized chaos, following evacuation procedures. But Ji-hoon pushed against the flow, heading toward the danger rather than away from it. He had to know that Baekdu and Hala were safe. He found Nari and Minho in the hallway outside the exhibition hall. Minho was trying to access the entrance, but the security systems had locked down everything automatically. What happened? Ji-hoon asked, breathing hard from his run. Environmental system failure, Nari said, reading data streaming on her datapad. The exotic habitat wing uses different atmospheric compositions for different species. Something went wrong with the mixing system. Sections are either getting toxic gas combinations or losing atmosphere entirely. The Cubs? Ji-hoon asked Minho. Our section should be fine, Minho said, his hands working frantically at the door controls. We're using standard oxygen-nitrogen mix. But I need to get in there to make sure. An explosion somewhere deeper in the station shook the floor beneath their feet. The lights flickered. Through the small window in the locked door, Ji-hoon could see chaos in the exhibition hall. Enclosures had breached. Small alien creatures were running loose, panicking. Some were clearly struggling to breathe in the wrong atmospheric mix. There are people in there, Nari said, her voice tight. Handlers who stayed to protect their animals. They're trapped. Station security forces arrived, but they were overwhelmed. The failure had affected multiple sections simultaneously. Some security officers were working on the environmental systems. Others were trying to evacuate trapped personnel. And still others were attempting to contain the escaped animals. A security chief, a tall insectoid being named Kyung-ho, approached them. You need to evacuate. This section is unstable. Our tigers are in there, Minho said. I need to get to them. Impossible, Kyung-ho said. We can't risk opening any sealed sections until we stabilize the atmospheric mix. If we open that door, we could flood this entire corridor with toxic gas. Then fix the systems, Ji-hoon demanded. We're trying, Kyung-ho replied, his mandibles clicking in frustration. But it's going to take hours. The damage is extensive. Through the window, Ji-hoon watched as a small crystalline creature, someone's cherished pet, collapsed, its light flickering out. A Valkyrie handler was pounding on a sealed door, trying to reach their companion. The scene was heartbreaking and chaotic. Minho suddenly grabbed Ji-hoon's arm. I have an idea. It's crazy, but it might work. What kind of idea? Nari asked. Let me take Baekdu and Hala into the affected areas, Minho said. They can help. Kyung-ho's entire body recoiled. You want to release predators into a crisis situation? Absolutely not. Listen to me, Minho said urgently. Tigers have incredible senses. They can detect air quality changes. They can hear and smell things we can't. They're strong enough to move debris, smart enough to follow commands, and fast enough to navigate dangerous terrain. And they trust me. They're also predators surrounded by panicking prey animals, Kyung-ho countered. The stress, the blood in the air from injuries, it could trigger their hunting instincts. It could, Minho admitted. But it won't. I've trained them since they were weeks old. They respond to my commands even in stressful situations. Ji-hoon looked through the window again. Another creature was struggling, its movements becoming weaker. Time was running out for many of the beings trapped inside. I'll take responsibility, Ji-hoon said. If anything goes wrong, the fault is mine, not the station's. Kyung-ho hesitated, his antennae twitching as he calculated risks. Finally, he nodded. You have one chance. If those predators show any sign of aggression, I will have them destroyed immediately. I have sharpshooters standing by. Understood, Minho said. It took 10 minutes to organize. Minho put on a protective suit rated for multiple atmospheric types. Nari programmed a path through the damaged sections, identifying areas where trapped beings had been detected. Kyung-ho positioned his security team at strategic points, all armed with weapons capable of stopping the tigers if necessary. The door to the exhibition hall opened slowly, equalizing pressure. Minho moved through quickly, making his way to the human enclosure. Baekdu and Hala were pacing nervously inside, sensing the danger even through their barriers. When they saw Minho, they rushed to the entrance, their rumbling purrs audible even over the alarm. Minho entered their enclosure and knelt between them, placing a hand on each of their heads. He spoke to them quietly, his voice steady and calm despite the chaos around them. Then he stood and gave a command. Both tigers focused on him instantly, their playful demeanor shifting to something more serious, more focused. He opened the enclosure and led them out. Their first instinct was to explore this new freedom, but Minho's voice kept them centered. He moved toward the damaged sections and they followed, flanking him like trained soldiers. Ji-hoon and Nari watched through security cameras that were still functioning. The feed showed Minho and the tigers entering an area where the atmospheric mix had gone wrong. Several small alien creatures were unconscious on the floor. A handler was collapsed nearby, their protective suit torn. Baekdu, search, Minho commanded, pointing toward a collapsed section of enclosures. The tiger moved immediately, using his nose to investigate the rubble. Within seconds, he began pawing at a specific spot, then looked back at Minho and made a deep chuffing sound. "Someone's under there," Nari said, reading the thermal imaging. "Alive but unconscious." Minho approached and assessed the situation. The debris was too heavy for him to move alone, but Bekdu was strong enough. Under Minho's guidance, the tiger used his powerful shoulders and front legs to shift the larger pieces. Within minutes, they had cleared a path to reveal a small reptilian being, barely breathing. "Hala, guard," Minho said, pointing to the rescued being. The tiger immediately positioned herself beside the unconscious alien, her body language alert but protective. Minho contacted security through his suit's communication system. "I have an injured Drantine at Section 12. Need immediate medical extraction." As they waited for the medical team, Bekdu's attention suddenly fixed on something deeper in the damaged area. His ears perked forward and he made a sound Jihoon had never heard before. Urgent but not aggressive. "What is it, boy?" Minho asked, following the tiger's gaze. Bekdu moved toward a sealed door that had been buckled by the explosion. He pressed his face against the gap at the bottom, sniffing, then looked back at Minho with clear intent. "Someone's trapped in there," Minho said into his communicator, "behind the sealed door in Section 12B. Can anyone access it?" "Negative," Kyung-ho's voice replied. "That door is jammed and the room beyond has toxic atmosphere. We can't open it without killing whoever's inside." But Bekdu was already working. He wedged his claws into the gap and pulled. The door was heavy metal designed to withstand incredible force, but the explosion had warped it. With the tiger's strength focused on the weakened point, something began to give. "Help him," Minho said to Hala. The smaller tiger joined her brother, and together they pulled. The metal groaned and then suddenly gave way, creating an opening just large enough for someone to squeeze through. The atmosphere rushed out, and Minho quickly looked inside with his suit's light. A figure was pressed against the far wall, unconscious. It was Delegate Tail, the Drantine who had been so fascinated by the tigers. But there was blood. Tail had been injured by debris, and the scent of it hit both tigers immediately. Jihoon, watching through the cameras, felt his heart stop. This was the moment Kyung-ho had warned about. Predators and blood. Both tigers went rigid. Their pupils dilated. Every instinct they had been born with suddenly surfaced. Bekdu took a step toward the opening, his nostrils flaring. "Bekdu," Minho said, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "Hala, sit." The tigers were frozen, torn between instinct and training. Jihoon could see the internal struggle playing out in their bodies. Every muscle was tense, ready to act on thousands of years of predatory evolution. "Sit," Minho repeated, firmer this time. Slowly, painfully, Bekdu sat. Hala followed a second later. They were still staring at the blood, still fighting their nature, but they were holding. Minho moved past them into the room and carefully pulled Tail through the opening. The Drantine was unconscious and bleeding from a gash on his arm. Medical teams arrived moments later, but in those moments both tigers remained exactly where Minho had told them to stay, even with fresh blood mere feet away. As the medical team took Tail away, Minho knelt between his tigers and wrapped his arms around them. They were shaking, the adrenaline of resisting their instincts taking a physical toll. He spoke to them softly, praising them, reassuring them. "Good," he whispered. "Good cats. You did so good." For the next 2 hours, Minho and the tigers worked through the damaged sections. They found 3 more trapped beings, moved debris from blocked passages, and even used their bodies to guide panicked alien creatures away from toxic atmosphere zones. By the time the environmental systems were finally stabilized, Bekdu and Hala had helped save 11 lives directly and many more indirectly. They had been surrounded by chaos, by fear, by blood and panic. Everything that should have triggered their predatory instincts. But they had chosen differently. Over and over again, they had chosen trust over instinct. When Minho finally led them back to their enclosure, both tigers were exhausted. They collapsed in their resting area, and Minho sat with them, his own energy spent. Jihoon and Nari entered the enclosure, joined by Kyung-ho and several other security officers who had witnessed everything. "I was wrong," Kyung-ho said simply. "About what they were, what they could be." Minho looked up at him, too tired to say much. "They're tigers, predators, that will never change. But they're also more than that. We all are." Word of what the tigers had done spread through the station even faster than news of their arrival had. By morning, every being on Zenith Prime knew that the predators everyone had feared had saved lives, while the gentle pets everyone had brought could only wait to be rescued. 3 days after the crisis, the Galactic Council reconvened in the main chamber. This time the atmosphere was completely different. The seats were filled beyond capacity, with delegations that hadn't even attended the original exhibition now present. Everyone wanted to see the humans and their tigers. Ji-hoon stood at the speaking platform once again, but this time Minho was with him. And at Minho's side sat Baekdu and Hala. The tigers wore ceremonial collars made by the station's artisans, decorated with symbols from dozens of different cultures. They sat calmly, watching the assembled beings with alert but peaceful eyes. Speaker Velian's metallic form flowed into a shape that suggested respect. Something Ji-hoon had learned was significant among their species. Delegate Ji-hoon Kim, handler Minho Choi, and honored companions Baekdu and Hala. The Galactic Council has called this session not to debate, but to recognize. What occurred during the environmental crisis has changed perspectives across the galaxy. Velian gestured, and holographic displays activated throughout the chamber, showing footage from the rescue operation. Beings watched as Baekdu moved debris, as Hala stood guard over an injured alien, as both tigers resisted their predatory instincts in the presence of blood. Many in the audience were seeing these images for the first time. 11 lives were saved directly by the actions of these predators and their handler, Velian continued. Countless more were saved indirectly through their assistance in navigating dangerous areas. They demonstrated not only capability but choice, the conscious choice to help rather than harm, to protect rather than prey. Delegate Tyle stood, his arm still bandaged from the injury he had sustained. I was one of those saved. I saw these tigers outside my sealed room. I smelled the blood from my wound and I knew what they were. I thought I was going to die, but they didn't attack. They saved me. A predator saved prey not because it had to, but because it chose to. His voice grew stronger as he continued. My species eliminated our apex predators millions of years ago because we feared them. We thought removing danger meant ensuring safety, but watching what happened 3 days ago, I realized what we lost. We lost the chance to build bridges with strength. We lost the opportunity to form bonds based on mutual respect rather than dependency. Youngji stood next, her small form barely visible until the display focused on her. Before this exhibition, I believed that harmony meant the absence of danger. That peace required everyone to be gentle and harmless. The humans have taught me that real harmony is harder than that. It's about different natures finding ways to coexist. It's about the strong choosing gentleness and the vulnerable choosing trust. More delegates rose to speak. Some shared their initial horror at seeing the tigers, then their gradual fascination. Others talked about how the rescue had changed their understanding of what makes a relationship meaningful. A few admitted that their own gentle pets, while beloved, had been helpless during the crisis, while the dangerous predators had stepped forward to help. Finally, Ambassador Surin approached the platform. Her crystalline body had lost its hostile pulsing, now glowing with a softer light. I was the first to object to the human exhibition. I called their choice reckless and inappropriate. I demanded the tigers be removed. She paused, her body shifting colors. I was wrong. She turned to address Minho directly. Handler Choi, may I approach your companions? Minho looked surprised but nodded. You may. They're calm today. Surin moved slowly toward the tigers, her crystalline form refracting the chamber's light into rainbow patterns. Baekdu and Hala watched her approach with curiosity. When she was close enough, she extended a limb tentatively. May I? She asked Minho. Baekdu, Minho said quietly. Be gentle. The tiger stood and moved toward Surin. The entire chamber held its breath. This crystalline being, whose species had no predators and no concept of them, was about to touch an apex hunter from Earth. Baekdu sniffed Surin's extended limb, then carefully pressed his face against it. Surin's body flashed through a spectrum of colors that Ji-hoon had learned indicated profound emotion among her people. He's warm, she said quietly. I can feel his breath, the power in him, but also the control, the choice. She looked at the assembled council. This is what the humans brought us. Not danger, but truth. The truth that power without violence is possible. That strength can choose compassion. She stepped back and Baekdu returned to Minho's side. Surin addressed the council formally. I propose that the Galactic Council not only recognize these tigers, but honor them. Further, I propose we establish the Companionship Accords, a new framework for understanding how different species relate to their world's creatures. Speaker Velian's form shifted into what might have been a smile. The proposal is noted. But first, the recognition, Velian gestured, and two council members approached carrying ornate crystals that floated in mid-air, held by some kind of field technology. These are stars of unity, Velian explained. Our highest honor for those who bridge divides and bring understanding. They are given rarely, perhaps once in a generation per species. Velian paused meaningfully. Today we present two, for Bekdu and Hala, who demonstrated that nature need not be an obstacle to civilization, but can be its teacher. Minho accepted the floating crystals, which immediately moved to hover above each tiger's head, casting gentle light on their fur. Both cubs looked up at their new ornaments with confusion, then decided they weren't important enough to worry about and returned to watching the crowd. The chamber erupted in the various sounds of approval that different species made. Ji-hoon felt emotion welling up in his chest. They had come hoping to be understood. They had achieved something far greater. Over the following weeks, the impact of the exhibition continued to spread. Nari was contacted by dozens of species wanting to learn about Earth's conservation programs. The Velkari began an initiative to study the nocturnal predators still living in their planet's wilderness reserves. The Drantine voted to attempt cloning and reintroduction of one of their extinct carnivorous species, starting a program that would take decades but that they believed was worth pursuing. The Companionship Accords were formally drafted and signed by 47 species. The agreement established that relationships with animals could take many forms, from the traditional caretaking model to the human approach of mutual respect with powerful creatures. It also set up exchange programs where species could learn from each other's methods. Ji-hoon received a personal message from Earth's government. The Secretary of Interstellar Relations wanted to expand the program. They were already selecting other handlers to travel to different worlds, bringing not just information, but living examples of how humans bonded with apex predators. Minho was offered a permanent ambassadorial position, which he accepted immediately. On their last day at Zenith Prime, Ji-hoon walked through the exhibition hall one final time. Most of the other exhibits had already been dismantled, but the human booth remained open. A steady stream of beings still came to see Bekdu and Hala, to watch them play, to observe how Minho interacted with them. Youngji arrived with a gift. It was a collar from her homeworld, traditionally given to honored protectors. The design was delicate but strong, woven from fibers that her people considered sacred. For Hala, Youngji said shyly, when I pressed my hand against the barrier that first day, she showed me that predator and prey are just words. Underneath, we're all just living beings trying to find our place in the universe. Minho accepted the gift gratefully and placed it on Hala. The tiger tolerated the addition with typical feline patience, more interested in the attention than the ornament itself. That evening, as the Perseverance prepared for departure, Ji-hoon stood in the observation deck again, looking out at Zenith Prime. Nari joined him, 2 cups of coffee in her hands. She offered him one. We changed something, she said. Not just opinions or policies. We changed how they see the universe. We showed them a mirror, Ji-hoon replied. Made them question assumptions they didn't even know they had. That's what Earth does best, I think. We challenge categories. Because we never fit neatly into any of them, Nari agreed. We're cooperative but individualistic, peaceful but dangerous, rational but emotional. We befriend predators and cuddle with prey animals. We're contradictions. We're complete, Ji-hoon corrected. The other species, they've streamlined themselves, made themselves consistent and predictable. But humans kept all the messy, complicated parts of being alive, including the scary parts. Down in the cargo hold, Minho was settling the tigers into their transport enclosure for the journey home. Bekdu and Hala, exhausted from weeks of attention and excitement, were already dozing. Their stars of unity floated above them, casting gentle light that made their striped coats seem to glow. Minho recorded a message to Dr. Hayoon Park back on Earth. The mission was successful beyond expectations. The cubs performed perfectly. More importantly, we've opened doors that will reshape interspecies relations for generations. Hundreds of species want to visit Earth now, to see our conservation programs, to understand how we coexist with predators. This is just the beginning. As the ship departed Zenith Prime, Ji-hun received one final transmission. It was from the Council, but specifically from Speaker Velian. Delegate Kim, you asked us to understand humanity by seeing your relationship with apex predators. We did understand, but perhaps not in the way you expected. We learned that humans don't see categories the way we do. You don't divide the universe into safe and dangerous, strong and weak, predator and prey. You see individuals, beings, potential partners, regardless of their nature. This is your gift to the galaxy and we are grateful for it. Ji-hun smiled and closed the message. He thought about the title of the exhibition, The Harmony of Companionship, and realized the humans had interpreted it differently than everyone else. The other species had brought harmonious companions, creatures that fit seamlessly into their lives through gentleness and dependency. Humans had brought companions that created harmony despite difference, despite danger, despite natural instincts that said they should be enemies. They had brought living proof that harmony wasn't the absence of conflict, but the choice to overcome it. The galaxy had asked to see pets. Every alien species brought puppies, soft, gentle things that needed protection. The humans brought cubs with teeth, powerful beings that could protect but chose partnership instead. And in that choice, in that daily selection of trust over instinct, lay a truth that resonated across the stars. The fiercest bonds are formed not between the strong and the weak, but between the strong who choose gentleness and those brave enough to trust them. Bektu and Hala, sleeping peacefully in their enclosure, had no idea they had become symbols. They only knew they were going home, back to the forest they had been born in, back to the sanctuary where they would eventually be released to live as their nature intended. But they would never forget the human who raised them, and the galaxy would never forget the lesson they taught. That power, when paired with compassion, becomes not danger but hope, and that the measure of a civilization isn't found in its gentlest members, but in how its strongest ones choose to use their strength. The stars beckoned and humanity answered with teeth and trust in equal measure, and the universe was better for it.